My name is Rose R. McCrae, 30 years old. Liam said it casually in front of his friends, like he was commenting on a drink menu. She's fine, but I could have done better. And the worst part was how normal it sounded coming out of his mouth, like he'd rehearsed that kind of dismissal in private so many times that saying it out loud felt easy. We were at a rooftop bar, the kind with overpriced cocktails and people performing happiness under string lights, and I was already tense because his friends always treated me like a temporary placeholder, not openly rude, just constant little comments that implied I was a phase he'd outgrow. Liam and I had been together just under a year, long enough that I thought we were building something, short enough that I kept excusing the red flags by telling myself he was just blunt, just honest, just the kind of man who didn't sugarcoat things. He loved an audience. When it was just us, he could be affectionate, even sweet in small, controlled doses, but around other people, he sharpened, louder, flashier, like he needed to prove he was the one with the power. One of his friends joked about how we ended up together, and before I could answer, Liam shrugged and delivered that line with a half smile. His friends laughed awkwardly, but they still laughed. And in that exact moment, something inside me didn't shatter, it cleared. I didn't feel embarrassment first. I felt quiet certainty, the kind that shows up when your brain stops negotiating with reality. I looked at him, smiled once, and said, "Yeah, you could have." He blinked like he hadn't expected agreement, like he wanted me defensive so he could label me insecure and win the moment. Instead, I put my glass down gently, not dramatic, not rushed, and I walked away. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I just walked until the noise behind me blurred into something distant and unimportant, and I realized I wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. I wasn't composing an apology text in my head. I wasn't rehearsing how to make him feel comfortable after he made me small. I was just leaving, and the calm in my chest felt unfamiliar but right. I hadn't even reached the end of the block before I heard him behind me. "Rose, don't be dramatic," Liam called out, irritation already creeping into his tone. Not concern, not confusion, annoyance. He caught up quickly, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, like he was inconvenienced by the fact that I had reacted at all. "You know I was joking," he said, lowering his voice like we were discussing something reasonable. "You're so sensitive sometimes." I stopped walking and looked at him properly, really looked at him, at the slight smirk he was trying to hide, at the way his eyes kept flicking back toward the rooftop entrance like he was more worried about what his friends thought than what I felt. "Explain the joke," I said calmly. He sighed dramatically, like I was asking him to solve a math equation. "Everyone exaggerates. It's not that deep. They know I'm with you." That word "with" hung there like ownership, like I should be grateful to occupy the position. Then he added the sentence that sealed it. "You knew I had options when we met. This isn't new." There it was again. Options. Like I was a draft pick. Like being chosen was a privilege I needed to continuously justify. I felt the sting of it, but it didn't hurt the way it would have months ago. Instead, it connected dots. All the little comments about his ex-girlfriend who really understood his ambition. The way he'd casually mentioned that some coworker had a crush on him. The subtle comparisons disguised as transparency. He wasn't being honest. He was keeping me slightly off balance. "I'm going home," I said. He scoffed. "Fine. Go sulk. We're having fun anyway." Then, as if he needed the final word, he added, "You're not exactly irreplaceable." I didn't respond. I just turned and kept walking. That sentence followed me for half a block, but instead of crushing me, it flipped something. If I wasn't irreplaceable, then neither was he. I didn't go straight home. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, breathing in cold air, watching strangers laugh like their lives were uncomplicated. My phone buzzed 3 times in a row. I glanced down. "Where did you go?" "Don't make this a thing. You're embarrassing me." I stared at the last message and almost laughed. Embarrassing him, not hurting me, not crossing a line, just optics. I slid my phone into my purse and kept walking until I saw a smaller bar tucked between a bookstore and a deli. No rooftop, no crowd, no performance. Inside, the lighting was dim and warm. I ordered a drink and sat alone for a few minutes, letting the adrenaline drain out of my system. A man about my age sat 2 stools away. Dark hair, relaxed posture, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but didn't shrink either. He nodded toward the speaker overhead. "Throwback playlist in a place like this feels rebellious," he said lightly. I smiled despite myself. "First time here," I replied. "Same." His name was Ethan. The conversation started small, surface level, nothing heavy. Work, the city, how absurdly expensive rooftop drinks were. He didn't interrupt. He didn't scan the room while I spoke. He asked questions because he was curious, not because he was measuring me. At one point, he tilted his head slightly and said, "You look like someone just heard something clarifying." I blinked at him. "Clarifying?" He shrugged gently, the kind of comment that rearranges how you see things. I surprised myself by answering honestly. "My boyfriend said he could have done better." Ethan didn't flinch or laugh. He just nodded once. "That's not confidence, he said. "That's insecurity wearing a tux." The simplicity of it hit harder than any defensive speech I could have made on my own behalf. My phone buzzed again. Ethan noticed. "You can answer it," he offered easily. "I don't want to," I said, and meant it. For the first time in a long time, ignoring someone didn't feel like losing power. It felt like reclaiming it. We moved to a small table near the back. We talked about past relationships in a careful, respectful way. He mentioned he'd ended something recently because he was tired of shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. Shrinking. The word lodged itself in my chest. I realized how often I'd done exactly that, laughing at jokes that made me smaller, softening opinions so I wouldn't be labeled difficult, adjusting myself to maintain his approval. At some point, Ethan lifted his glass and said, "Here's to not shrinking anymore." I clinked mine against his. It wasn't flirty, it wasn't charged, it was steady, and the steadiness felt like oxygen. I woke up the next morning expecting regret. I expected that familiar sinking feeling where you replay everything and convince yourself you overreacted. Instead, I felt clear, not euphoric, not vengeful, just clear. My phone was less clear. It was chaos. Missed calls, long texts sent between 2 and 5 in the morning. The tone had evolved in predictable stages. First irritation, then sarcasm, then wounded pride. "So you just disappear now? You really made me look stupid. I can't believe you'd walk out like that." Notice the pattern. Not once did he say, "I'm sorry." Not once did he say, "I hurt you." It was all about how my reaction reflected on him. By late morning, mutual friends started reaching out. Casual check-ins that weren't casual. "Hey, heard things got weird." "Liam seems really upset." One friend even said, "He said you stormed off because you couldn't take a joke." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, I didn't feel respected, so I left. The simplicity of it made some people uncomfortable. I could tell. It removed the drama. It removed the spectacle. It also removed their ability to reframe it as oversensitivity. Around noon, Liam sent one final message. Longer this time, more polished. "I've been thinking." Maybe I worded it poorly, but relationships require honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. "I think you overreacted, but I'm willing to talk." There it was. Accountability with a condition attached. Maybe, worded poorly. "I think you overreacted. I'm willing to talk if you accept that your reaction was the real problem." I stared at the message for a long time. The old version of me would have latched onto that willingness, would have apologized for making a scene, would have thanked him for being open. Instead, I noticed something unsettling. My chest wasn't tight, my hands weren't shaking. I wasn't afraid of losing him. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. In the end, I sent one sentence. "I don't want to be with someone who ranks me." That was it. No essay, no emotional monologue, no anger. He didn't respond. And for the first time in our relationship, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like resolution. Later that afternoon, Ethan texted. Nothing dramatic, just, "Hope today feels lighter than last night." I smiled at my phone. It was such a small sentence, but it contained something Liam rarely offered. Consideration without performance. I agreed to see him again, not because I needed a rebound, not because I wanted to prove something, but because I felt curious instead of anxious. And that difference mattered. Seeing Ethan again didn't feel like rebellion. It didn't feel like revenge. It didn't even feel like starting something new. It felt like stepping into a room where the temperature was finally comfortable. We met at a quiet Italian place he liked. No rooftop, no curated aesthetic, No audience. Just warm light, low music, and people minding their own business. The kind of place Liam would have called basic, and then spent 10 minutes explaining why he deserved somewhere better. That thought made me smile, not bitterly, just with recognition. Ethan didn't ask me to define what we were doing. He didn't make a show of how available he was. He just showed up. He asked about my day and waited for the answer. When I talked, he listened instead of scanning the room for someone more interesting. I didn't realize how rare that was until I experienced it. Halfway through dinner, he said casually, "You seem lighter." I laughed softly. "I feel lighter." He nodded like that made sense. It's exhausting being compared. The word compared landed differently than ranked. It was softer, but just as accurate. I thought about how often Liam had referenced other women in subtle ways, how his ex-girlfriend had understood his ambition better, how a coworker totally would have gone for him if he'd let her, how he framed himself as someone constantly evaluating options. I used to call that confidence. Now I saw it for what it was, insecurity that needed witnesses. After dinner, we walked for a while, not because we had nowhere else to be, but because neither of us was rushing. At one point, I made a self-deprecating joke about being lucky Liam dated me at all. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Habit. Ethan stopped walking. Not dramatically, just enough to make me notice. "Don't talk about yourself like that," he said quietly. "No teasing, no sarcasm, just a boundary on my behalf." I felt something shift in my chest. I hadn't realized how normalized that inner dialogue had become. I'd absorbed Liam's comparisons so thoroughly that I'd started preemptively diminishing myself. We stood there for a moment under a streetlight, and I understood something uncomfortable. Liam's comment at the rooftop wasn't the first time he'd made me feel smaller. It was just the first time he'd done it without disguising it. That night, when I got home, I didn't check my phone obsessively. I didn't stalk his social media to see if he'd posted something cryptic. I showered, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on my couch in silence. The silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. A few days later, I started hearing things through mutual friends. Apparently, Liam had been telling people that I couldn't handle honesty, that I always knew he could do better, that I walked away because I was insecure. What surprised me wasn't that he said those things. It was how little they affected me. The people who knew me well didn't question my decision. One friend even admitted, "I always thought he talked down to you." I didn't correct the rest. I didn't craft a counter-narrative. For the first time, I wasn't interested in winning a social argument. I was interested in peace. Ethan and I kept seeing each other. Slowly. No labels, no declarations, just consistency. He remembered details. He followed through. He didn't need an audience to be kind. And the more time passed, the clearer it became. Walking away hadn't been dramatic. It had been overdue. The last message from Liam came on a random Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. No build-up, no drama. Just one line. "So that's it? You really think you can do better?" I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. A month ago, that sentence would have hooked something inside me. It would have made me defensive, made me want to prove that I wasn't chasing better, that I wasn't trading up, that I wasn't shallow. But sitting there at my desk, sunlight spilling across my keyboard, I realized something quietly powerful. It was never about doing better than him. It was about not being diminished by him. I didn't type back. I didn't craft a clever response. I didn't screenshot it for friends. I just deleted it. That night, Ethan and I were cooking at my place. Nothing impressive. Pasta, garlic, music low in the background. At one point, I burned the sauce slightly and made a joke about how I ruin everything I touch. The words slipped out automatically. He looked at me gently and said, "You don't ruin things. You walk away from what doesn't fit." It was such a small correction, but it hit harder than any rooftop insult ever had. I thought about that night again, about the way Liam said I wasn't irreplaceable, about how he framed love like a ranking system. I realized I'd been confusing competition with passion. I'd thought that tension meant depth, that being slightly unsettled meant I cared more. But care isn't supposed to feel like auditioning. Care isn't supposed to feel like waiting to be downgraded. A few weeks later, I ran into one of Liam's friends at a coffee shop. She hesitated, then said quietly, "You know, that night, it wasn't funny." I just nodded. I didn't need the validation anymore, but it was interesting how perspective shifts once you stop defending yourself. The truth is, Liam probably still believes his version of events, that I overreacted, that I couldn't handle his honesty, that I lost something valuable. He might even believe he dodged a bullet. But here's what I know. I didn't lose anything on that rooftop. I lost anxiety, I lost self-doubt, I lost the habit of shrinking. And I gained something quieter and far more durable. I gained the ability to leave the first time someone tells me I'm almost enough. She said she could have done better. Maybe she could have. But the real upgrade wasn't a new man, it was a new standard. And that standard doesn't negotiate with humiliation anymore.